The years passed in poverty, and the boy who had once been called delightful to hear grew tall in rags. Thapaga, his sister Peta, and their mother Nyansakarjian lived as servants in their own land. They worked the fields that should have been theirs, ate scraps, and slept on the bare ground. The uncle and the aunt, who had promised the dying father to guard the family wealth, had instead swallowed it whole, and the world around them said nothing. Neighbors who had once smiled at the prosperous trader's family now looked away, because the powerful are seldom contradicted. When Thapaga came of age, his mother decided the time had come to claim what was theirs. The father had given clear instructions on his deathbed. The property, the house, the fields, all of it was to be returned to the son when he was grown, and he was to be married to his betrothed, Zese. So the mother put on what dignity her poverty allowed, gathered her children, and went before the uncle and the aunt to ask, plainly and rightfully, for the inheritance. What followed was the cruelest hour of their lives. The uncle laughed in their faces. He claimed there had never been any wealth left in trust, that the family had always been poor, that they were lying beggars trying to steal from their betters. The aunt joined in with mockery sharper than any blade. And then, before the gathered villagers, they did not merely refuse. They drove the mother and her children out with insults and with blows, shouting that if they had soldiers they would make war, and if they had spells they could curse the household. They threw them into the dust and slammed the door, and the whole village watched and did nothing. Nyansakarjian rose from the ground a changed woman. Something in her broke that day, and what grew in its place was not sorrow but fire. She had endured the loss of her husband, the theft of her home, and years of grinding labor. She could perhaps have borne even that. But the public humiliation, the laughter, the silence of the neighbors who had eaten at her husband's table, this she could not bear. A proud heart that has been shamed in front of everyone it knows will often choose anything, even ruin, over the slow death of dishonor. And so the mother made a terrible resolve. She could not fight the uncle with hands or words, but there was another way, an old and shadowed way that the people of those mountains both feared and half believed. There were teachers who knew the dark arts, the casting of curses, the summoning of hail to flatten the harvest, the spells that could bring a house down upon the heads of those inside it. If she could not have justice, she would have revenge. She called her son to her. Thapaga was still little more than a boy, gentle by nature, the child whose voice had been a delight to all who heard it. But his mother set before him a burden no child should carry. She told him he must go far away and find a master of destructive magic, and learn from him the spells that kill. He must return and bring death and ruin upon the uncle, the aunt, and all who had scorned them. To make ready, she sold half of one small field, the last scrap of land left to them, and from it she gathered provisions for the journey and a little turquoise to pay the teacher. Then she swore an oath that would chain her son's heart for years. She told him that if he came back having learned nothing, if he failed to bring her the revenge she demanded, she would kill herself before his very eyes. She would take her own life in front of him rather than live on in shame. Imagine the weight of those words on a young man who loved his mother. He was not driven by his own hatred so much as by hers, and by the unbearable thought of her death. Her grief had become his command. Here we may pause and feel the tragedy plainly, for it teaches something true. Nyansakarjian was not a wicked woman. She was a wounded one. Injustice had been done to her, real and undeserved, and no one had stood up to put it right. From that genuine wound grew a poisoned fruit. This is how evil so often enters the world, not through monsters, but through ordinary people pushed past their breaking point, who pass their pain like an inheritance to the ones they love most. The mother's curse upon her enemies became a curse upon her own son's soul, and she could not see it. So young Thapaga set out from his ruined home with provisions on his back and his mother's oath ringing in his ears. He did not go seeking wisdom or peace. He went seeking power, the power to harm, carrying a love twisted into a weapon. In the next chapter, we will follow him to the house of a master of the black arts and watch as the gentle boy with the beautiful voice learns the spells of destruction and turns them with terrible success against the people of his own village.